Before I get into this week's video, I just wanted to say that next week's video is going to be a 2,000 subscriber Q&A special. So please leave your comments, your questions down in the comments below. As many questions as you want, as long as they're not too personal, I will answer them. You can also, at me on Twitter, at Objo Gaming, and ask me questions, anything like that. I will be taking questions up until, we'll cut it off at 5 p.m. Eastern on Friday. So before the video, so before next Saturday, and we will see where they go from there, and we'll do the Q&A special. But moving into that, I do want to get into this one because this is easily my most frequently asked question, this week's video topic. So I figured I'd do it, and that is, where do I start collecting and what system should I be collecting for? And I don't like this question specifically, not because it's a bad question, it's a fine question. But I think it's way too broad of a question. I mean, if you're gonna, I've written out pretty lengthy comment responses before to this. So hopefully next time I get this question, I can just send them this video as a way to just, answer the question a little bit more succinctly. But yeah, the answer is there's really whatever you want. I don't know what you're really into. It's going into, what you should start collecting for. Where should you start? I always think I think it's good to start with what you have. That's what I did. So if you have like a PS4, you want to start collecting for that, I think that's a great idea. Whatever you have, I think that's probably the best bet. Make sure you actually are into collecting and it's not just, something you thought was cool and that you don't actually really care about too much before you go out and buy 5 retro systems that are just going to sit there. I think that's probably your best bet, is number one, to start with what you have. But when people ask me, what system should I start collecting for? It's always like, but, what do you like? What are you into? I don't want to tell someone who hates JRPGs to get into the PS1 because I don't think they'd like that. Or I don't want to tell, someone who doesn't like, 8-bit platformers to get into the NES when they'd rather be playing, the Wii or something. So I think that's a big part of it that makes it so hard for me to answer the question. It also depends on how you're going to be collecting, I've always thought. So I myself go to the garage sales and flea markets all the time and just buy a ton of games for extremely cheap prices. I know this isn't, a valid way or, a good way to do this for a lot of people. I know a lot of people don't have the ability to go out and do that. A lot of people don't have flea markets or garage sales in their area that they live. And I know that can be a problem. So keeping that in mind, I would say, first, if you're going to be doing that, if you're going to actually get into it and start really going garage selling, flea marketing, hardcore, collect whatever, buy whatever. I mean, if these games are $1, $2, $3 each, and you're getting the console for $5 to $10, collect anything and everything. I think that's the most fun way that I've seen it, but this is just in my opinion. Even if you don't really care about the original Xbox, if it's cheap and you can get a system with a bundle of games for $30, you can check out a new system, maybe trade that stuff or sell it if you don't really care for it. But I think that's a fun way to get into systems that you may not realize that you're interested in. I think that's a really good way to do it. So yeah, I would say that if you are willing to go out and go garage selling and go flea marketing, I would say that the best bet is to just collect whatever you want, whatever you see, I should say. Because, and I mean, obviously don't go out and buy everything. Don't go out and buy, every crappy loose DS game imaginable because they're $5 each or something. Look what's interesting to you. Look what you can get, especially with systems. I always say if you find a cheap system, get it. You get the whole access to the whole library now. But yeah, I would say go for whatever. That's the reason my collection is kind of the way it is because I do most of my finds that way, for my retro stuff at least. With a couple libraries with exceptions for that, but that's the reason why, certain libraries are bigger than others. It's, it's just what I find. It's just what I can get. That's why my NES library is big because there's so many of them, but I don't have too many Saturn games. It's what you can find. And in that circumstance, I would say get what you can that looks interesting, especially if it's cheap. But one thing I wouldn't recommend is going to stores and getting what you can because it's cheap. Because, going to a garage sale and getting a cheap copy of the Wind Waker on GameCube is much different than going to your local game store and getting a cheap copy of Top Gun on NES. You don't want to just buy. I see a lot of people fall into this where they start buying games when they get started collecting. I was kind of guilty of this at the beginning too, because I was a lot younger than a lot of people when they start collecting. A lot of people start collecting and they think, oh, all these guys on YouTube are really cool because they have all these shelves full of games and they're all full of games. And there's plenty of YouTubers that have, when you look at it just in total, and I'm not going to name names, but when you look at it in total, you can see that they have a huge libraries, huge, basement full of games, everything. They have 2,000 games on their PS2 or whatever. I don't think there was that many released, but you know what I'm saying. But when you look at their libraries, it's sports games, it's, Shrek 2, it's a bunch of garbage. And I'm not going to say that that's the wrong way to collect. I mean, whatever, there's no wrong way to collect. I'll say that. But I feel like that can really, really, really lead to burnout, which you don't want to hit. If you're going to be putting a lot of money into collecting, you don't want to put a lot of money to it and then figure out, hey, I don't really care for this. And I think that can lead to burnout, is if you just buy anything and everything just to fill shelves, just to fill space. I think it's not a great idea. But moving then into, if you're going to be buying exclusively from eBay, you're going to be buying exclusively from stores, GameStop, maybe a local game store, whatever it may be. I would say, yeah, whatever you have and whatever you're interested in. If you have a Wii or something, or you have a PS2, I would say, start getting games that you think are interesting for that system. I feel like that's easily the best way to go about it. I wouldn't say go out and buy yourself a Super Nintendo and an N64 and go buy a Dreamcast and the Saturn and all this. I wouldn't go buy all that stuff at once. I'd say, you have a PS3, I would maybe stick to the PS3. Maybe finish what you want from that library, move on to something else, especially if money's limited. I know a lot of the people who ask me this question, I can tell that they're maybe a little bit younger, maybe middle school, high school age, wanting to get in collecting. And that's perfectly fine. That's the age I got into collecting. So you can do it. But yeah, I would say, yeah, just keep focused at the beginning. Don't go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff, because you never know. It might be just something that you're not interested in long term. I had a friend who started really getting into collecting. I think partially because I was into it in high school, and he spent a lot of money going out and buying, a GameCube, and he bought a Super Nintendo, and he bought a bunch of like the high end games for those at the time. This was about 2012. And then he just got out of it and sold it all. So that's not something I'd recommend. I would recommend you just, test the waters, go easy at first. Obviously don't spend money that you don't have. Don't make yourself go broke for game collecting, because it's not that important at the end of the day. But yeah, I would recommend that you start small, start with what you have, and move from there. Um, but yeah, if I'm going to suggest systems, another question I'm kind of melding into this is, what systems should you collect for? I get this one all the time. What are the cheap systems to collect for? What are the systems I should be collecting for? And that changes year to year, pretty much almost month to month, it seems like anymore. Stuff gets expensive, stuff goes up, stuff goes down. Right now, GameCube stuff is expensive, N64 stuff's expensive, Dreamcast stuff's getting expensive. It all comes in waves. So, this video could very well be outdated by the time that this actually goes up, even. Because it just constantly fluctuates. But if I were to make a call right now and say what you should be collecting for, you have to I almost feel like, once again, it's too broad of a question. You have to, if I'm not taking into account what you're into at a small scale, and I'm at least taking into an account at a larger scale, as in, what are you into? Are you into retro? Are you into more modern games? Are you into, early 3D? I mean, there's so much are you into, real old stuff, pre-NES stuff? There's so much stuff to be looking into. So that's something to consider as well. But as far as that would go, I mean, if you're into that really old stuff, Atari stuff right now, you can get it. I mean, I don't collect Atari stuff anymore. That was something that I would collect anything and everything for, and I eventually did not care for it and sold it all off. But I mean, if you can get yourself a 2600, you have access to a library of games. Maybe not the most interesting, but very, very important to the history of gaming. If you want to at least see where the roots of gaming kind of start from, you can get. I mean, I was going out to the flea markets and garage sales and I got like boxes of like 40 Atari games for like 15, $20. That stuff's really cheap. Unfortunately, once again, I'll say that stores don't really carry it because what they make 50 cents off a game. Big, no one sits and takes up space in the store. But I mean, that'd be something to consider. You can get lots on eBay that are cheap. Uh, I don't really care for Atari. I think it's a little bit too primitive for myself. But if you are interested in that, I'd say that's a good way to go. If we're talking cheapness, I'd say actually I wouldn't have said this 5, 6 years ago, but right now I'd say NES is probably decent. I feel NES peaked in like 2016 price wise, and now it's ever since then been going down. But I mean, there's a that's a huge library of games and a lot of really interesting games, even if they're not great games. A lot of interesting games to learn from. Uh, Kind of just in general, it's really interesting system in a lot of ways. And there's some expensive games. You might, if you want to get the Mega Mans or something like the Zeldas, you might have to be shelling out a little bit more. But I mean, the Mario's aren't too expensive, and those are all-time classics. I mean, there's a lot of cool games on the NES that you can get for a reasonable price. I find NES stuff at the garage sales pretty frequently, so that's something to keep in mind. It's not hard to find. Some systems I don't want to recommend to you all are a little bit harder to find both in stores at the garage sales. Like, for example, I'm huge into collecting for the Dreamcast. I'm getting pretty close to a full set, but that's a kind of a pain to collect for. I rarely ever find it at garage sales. You go to stores and they maybe have 10 games and it's all commons. I wouldn't recommend that system as much as I like it because of that, because it's a little harder to collect for. Meanwhile, you go into any game store and there's NES stuff everywhere. There's no short supply of the big name fun NES games. So I would say that's a good system to start with as well. Um, if I were to say if you want something middle generation 3D, or if you want to get into RPGs, I would definitely recommend the original PlayStation. Um, I think there's a lot of great RPGs. I mean, you can get classics like Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9 for those games are pretty cheap right now. They're under like $20 last time I checked to get a complete copy. And obviously, those are incredibly important games and great games. So those are definitely ones to keep in mind. There's a lot of I mean, if you want to get into JRPGs, I'd say that system has the most. I know a lot of people make the opinion that the PlayStation 1 is not aged well, but I'd say from a historical standpoint, it's very important to the history of gaming. Yeah, I would highly recommend PlayStation 1. I mean, some of that stuff can get a bit expensive right now. If you want some higher end JRPGs, you're going to be paying some, but there's a lot of fun games that you can get on that system. Uh, and a lot of interesting games that you can get on that system that may not be very good, but can at least be entertaining at the very least. So I'd say that's a good system to start with. If you want to get into Sega, one thing I see a lot of people, when they say, where should I start? It's what systems are you interested in? Are you interested in Nintendo? Are you interested in PlayStation? Are you interested in Xbox, Sega, somewhere in between? Um, and a lot of people, maybe have seen Sega stuff, but never really got into Sega stuff. And I would definitely recommend the Genesis. A lot of cool games on that system, a lot of fun, interesting games on the Genesis. I really like it a lot, but it is harder to recommend stuff from Sega just because, uh, especially with like Saturn, I never find Saturn stuff, and when I do, there might be 3 games in the store and they're all junk. It's hard to recommend Dreamcast as much as I like it. It's such a cool system, but it's starting to get expensive. It's hard to find. Nintendo 64, I'd say there's a ton of classics on there. But you're definitely going to be paying money if you want some of the better games on that system. If you want to get the Zeldas, you're definitely going to be paying. If you want to get more modern with things, I would recommend PS2. There's a lot of cool stuff on there, and you can get those games for very cheap, and they're very easy to come by. You'll find some of the mascot platformers, stuff like that, pretty frequently. I find PS2 systems a lot at garage sales. If I'm in the middle of a garage sale week, the two systems that I'm almost guaranteed to find every week is a PS2 and a and a Wii. And those are two modern systems I'd highly recommend to start collecting for. Obviously, if you're not interested in either of those systems, don't. But I would say that you can get good games on those systems for relatively inexpensive. And there's a lot of games. They're easy to find. They're everywhere. I definitely recommend those systems. 360 and PS3 stuff and Wii U, especially Wii U. I would say if you want to start collecting stuff for cheap and getting good stuff, those are right now or where you want to go. GameStop is just trying to get rid of that stuff. They're always seems like once a month they're doing a buy two get one or buy two get two sale on that stuff, trying to get it out of there. So yeah, I think that's gonna wrap it for this one. I just wanted to kind of answer that. It might be a little bit rambly. I'm sorry about that. Um, but I just wanted to, get in general. I do get that question a lot, and I don't like that question. Not because it's a bad question. You're not stupid for. There are stupid questions, and that's not one of them. My main thing is that it's too broad of a question to answer in a little YouTube comment. So that's why hopefully this video will be helpful. If it was helpful, make sure to leave a like. Remember to leave a comment down below with your questions for the question and answer video. And once again, thank you so much for 2,000 subscribers. Let's keep going with that momentum. So make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Follow me on Twitter at ObjoGaming, and I will see you next week for the question and answer video.